Our guest for today's session, Ishani Kochar, is a political science graduate from Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi, and then she went on to do her master's in European Studies from MAHE, that is Manipal Academy of Higher Education, and the University of Latvia. She's currently pursuing a postgraduate diploma in management and liberal arts from Vedika Scholars Program for Women, Delhi. Before this diploma, she was working as a research associate in Erasmus Plus in a capacity building project called CLIL. I think that stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
So these are courses for teachers of foreign languages to improve their proficiency and learn innovative methods of teaching a foreign language. So Ishani is an army kid. So she changed 8 schools and 1 junior college prior to all this. And so I understand when she says that she has geographical roots spread all over the country and has what she calls an identity in flux. But surprisingly, despite this, or maybe because of this, she finds joy in travel and conversation. And her other hobbies are music and photography. So, welcome, Ishani. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting
Let
me.
me, I wanted to ask you that if you were to describe yourself in 3 words, what are the adjectives or qualities that you would give to yourself?
Um, Adaptable, patient, and relentless.
Very impressive. And I can understand
Yeah.
how you needed to be all this considering your background. So, who has influenced you
Yeah.
in becoming what you are?
Well, often the easiest answer is your parents, which would also be in my case. But again, I've been living away from home for the past 10 years now. And I'm just 25. So I left home when I was 15 or 16. So I think
Yeah.
there is a lot of individuality and a lot of different kinds of influences. So not particularly a single person or a single influence that has had an impact on whatever I've become. But of course, the values that I carry from home. The things I'm interested in, however, came up one after the other in my life.
Yeah. So I would say that both your family, parents, and yourself in made you
Yeah.
what you were.
Yes.
And considering the background that you've had, that you kept changing places, schools, would you say that you had a safe childhood?
I think I had a heavily protected childhood in some sense, because not just because of my father's profession. There are some army kids who end up living in big cities, but then there are some like me who've gone everywhere that their father has gone, which means sometimes you're in a place that is barricaded, there are just 40 families, 10 children. So, in that sense, yes, we didn't have to worry if we had to take our bicycle out in the evening about some strangers. I think for me, the biggest challenge came when I went to Delhi for my bachelor's because that's when I was living alone. I was 17 or 18, and for 3 years that I studied in Delhi, I was living alone. But I'd still say I've had a very safe upbringing.
Okay.
If I was younger, I would say a physical space. But I think as you grow older, especially as a woman, you tend to realize
Yes.
that the notion of a safe space is not about where you are. I remember arguing with my parents in Delhi when I wanted to go out in the evenings or at night and telling them that the possibility of something bad happening is not going to stop me from going out because sometimes the most unsafe spaces are your homes and you know I don't think it's a physical space. I think it's a matter of people, it's a matter of values, it's a matter of intention. So not a physical space. See, I'm a student of political science. could have
Yes.
a 1 hour long discussion on what this
Yes.
means.
Uh,
Well, I would maybe say something like resources, equal access to opportunity, equal access to I think there is this notion about capability versus opportunity. Everyone is capable, but not everyone has the opportunity. So I guess that's quality to have that. So of course, privilege can bring entitlement, but if you are somebody who is acutely aware of your privilege, and if you do not, I think it's a conscious effort. You have to be
yes.
consciously aware of more than yourself. If you are someone who has only stayed in a particular kind of environment and don't know anything beyond that, then that's difficult. For instance, in army schools, they're not like other private or public schools. They're made for, all kinds of different social backgrounds. All of us come together. So growing up, I never studied in uh, a uniform classroom, so to say, because children of all ranks and children of all different kinds of backgrounds and families would all come together and study. So I think having an upbringing like that grounds you anyway. You cannot be
Yeah.
entitled to grow up like that. But if you're growing up in an isolated, protected bubble environment, then I guess you can be entitled. And I think that will be difficult for you when you step out of that bubble ever. So yeah,
Yes.
I do agree, but to an extent. I think the biggest problem that comes with the entitlement in my interactions with people is that it tends to trivialize the experiences of those who don't have that entitlement. Like, it's kind of like if I don't experience it, it doesn't exist. If I haven't felt it, then I have no reason to fight for it. Which is something we see daily in the news, we see it daily in the things that are happening, we
Yes.
see it in protests and struggles and everything that goes around that. People only tend to fight for things that affect them directly, because of which there is a large chunk of people that will just discredit an entire struggle just by saying, oh, that's nothing, simply because, their privilege allows them to be protected from it. So, of
True.
course, there is I think, a big problem there. And it's a really bad example, but it's like Gautam Buddha. It took him stepping out and coming out to see the misery and suffering in the world to realize the kind of life he was living. And I think
Yes.
entitlement is kind of like that. And it's very conscious and it's very painful to step out of it. But that's the only way they can solve it. No, I think the closest that I came to this was my flatmate in college used to work with an organization called Katkatha, based out of Delhi, which also works with child sexual abuse. And the only thing I saw was how it affected her, being an activist in that space, working directly with children of sex workers in Delhi. So I don't think I am acutely aware of the facts, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a big number. I think family
It's
would be number one. Family, extended family, I think. As you grow older, maybe friends, because I think when you're younger, you're more vulnerable to family members. Maybe when you cross a certain age, you can still recognize it in your family, but you may not recognize it in your friends. I think with friends, it's even more difficult because you're trying to, keep up with the culture.
and peer pressure, trying to stay
And
within the group.
I think I would answer the question in the same way if it was a question about rape, for instance. And I don't think that punitive measures or preventive criminal action, I really don't think that that can solve for this. I think I think the problem exists at a very individual mental level and at a societal level. And just because you put 5 people in prison doesn't mean like fear. I don't think fear works like that. They have had these policies and policies like this for a very, very long time, for centuries even. And I think it is very clear that, you know, It's not the answer. Maybe in some cases it's necessary, but I think a better way would be to target it from, I don't know, better upbringing, rehabilitation, understanding these patterns when these people are growing up. Because, like, I don't think a person can be born uh, like this. I feel like this is acculturation. You pick up things, maybe it's your personal family, that's, or maybe you just don't understand that what you're doing is wrong.
Absolutely.
Nobody should have the benefit of doubt, but I don't think punishment can solve it. It can cause fear, but it can't solve it. I don't think there necessarily needs to be physical contact. I feel like, let's say, even personally, I would define something wrong as discomfort. Like, even when I have this conversation with my peers, let's say men who are courting or approaching women, as to how do I know what I'm doing wrong? And I don't think there's a set answer to that. I think discomfort is very subjective. But to define it, because there was a recent judgment, no, in a court
Yeah.
about something
Yes.
that was so stupid.
Yeah.
Because even if there was no touch, even if there is intention, it is incorrect. If you're making
Correct.
somebody feel uncomfortable, you may not have direct physical contact, but I think it still counts as that. If it affects the child's sexuality, if it affects their mind, then I think it still definitely still counts as that. It's just that it makes it very difficult to. Our courts are not designed to deal with this.
Yes.
They are not designed to deal with this problem. Maybe in some children you would see a change in behavior, but I don't think it's necessary. If it's a trusted person in the family, there's a chance if you're very young that you don't even know that something wrong is happening. I think as parents, it's important. You can't distrust everyone, but it's important for you to be careful of where your child is, because say you leave them with an uncle, and that uncle is very close to the child may not even know that something wrong is happening. So maybe
True.
there is no behavior alteration. I'm sure there is a process. I don't think there can be 100% recovery ever, because I don't think memory can just leave. I think over a period of time, the child may understand how to deal with it,
Yeah.
how to come to terms with it, maybe through therapy, maybe through other avenues. I think it's most important for the child to realize that there's nothing wrong with them, or that they didn't do anything wrong. To be able to, live with yourself, kind of a thing, I guess. And I think it's even harder when you're younger, because you don't even know what happened. You may not even remember it that well because your memory may block it out. I don't, it sounds a little pessimistic, but you can't have 100% recovery. But you may figure out how to live with it without it affecting your life so much. I think the Didi would make a hell of a show about it, but I don't know. I don't know if the family would support it directly. I don't think they will take it head on. Maybe they will ask them to forgive the chachu, give it time. It's okay. It won't happen again. Maybe the chachu will come and apologize. I think that's sadly how things work in families. We allow people, you know, that kind of leeway.
Yes.
Nobody wants to
But
go to the court. Unless it's a, if it's a nuclear family that's detached from the extended family and doesn't care, I think then there is a little privilege in that. It depends on the nature of the family. Otherwise there will be no FIR. They will try to solve it with the elders. The grandparents will probably come and say, it's nothing, what are you talking about? Maybe somebody will turn it around and say fake allegations, blame the child. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking all of this from movies, but it's so it sounds so plausible and real that I think that's how it would be. We are scared that once everybody finds out that we had a problem, it'll be difficult. So it's not the lack of willingness, it's just fear, I think, of being branded. I think this is information that should be handed out in schools, because anonymity is great. I think, especially for youngsters, and not just in child sexual abuse, but also in, you know, the of course, there was never an age group for it, but with the newer generations, the instances that happen, the age is just dropping every day, even in urban, especially in urban cultures, let's say. And nobody talks about it. So, if there is an anonymous mechanism, if children have access to it, if teenagers have access to it, it can be used. But I think, again, it will allow for the reporting, but the verification would still be an ordeal because
Yes.
there may be misuse if there is a mechanism like that. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't have it. The misuse maybe will be exceptional, it will be in exceptions. It's kind of like, how the Dowry Act works, and then people are like, oh, fake allegations. It's something
Yeah.
that can happen in any field. But I think it would be empowering to have a e-reporting system, because if, say, let's say that the Didi or the sister knew in this case that, okay, she's told her mother, family is not reacting, nobody's listening, but she knows that this is something that exists, and maybe she can do something about it, and she doesn't have to be answerable for it, then I think she might. When I was graduating college, I was very interested in the ARSH initiatives, the Adolescent Reproductive and Sexual Health initiatives. And from my, at least, personal experience, what I saw was that it's good, but it's still kind of useless. I think two things need to be done. One is knowledge. A child should be able to tell if there is sexual abuse. If it's difficult for the entire legal system to define it, it's obviously difficult for a child to figure out that something is wrong. That's one. I think we need to have a system of education where, have a module where a child knows that if this happens, this is who you talk to, or if this happens, this is what you do, or, as they grow older, give them information. I think beyond a certain age, the presence of information is enough. There should be, you know, uh, we only have sexual harassment at the level of college is understandable because the age of consent is such that you can't even acknowledge something like that in a younger environment. I think it disallows the fact that it's legally not possible, somehow creates this vacuum for any, person. Like, you might have a counselor, but you will not have a sexual harassment grievance center in a school, you know.
Yeah.
So there needs to be, like, the child needs to know, maybe through a module, maybe through classes, maybe through activities, uh, maybe something as simple as recurring boards with the number, or, you know, on it, just to reinforce the idea that you can. I think that may give them the, push that's needed to report something. I would be willing to say that I am a Rakshin.